Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride. I'm joined tonight by one of our favourite guests, Andrew Wilson from the All Under One Banner organisation, and a new guest, Mirella Delabegovic, who is the Director of the Aberdeen Cardiovascular and Diabetes Centre. So Mirella, how are you this evening?
Fine, thanks very much. How are you doing?
I'm well. And Andrew, how about you?
Kenny, I'm great, thank you. Good evening.
Yeah, we do apologise, by the way, we're starting a little bit late tonight. We had a wee technical difficulty before we got started tonight, but we are all ready to go. So we'd start, as always, with our update on coronavirus statistics for the day. And as of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there have been a total of 53,082 coronavirus tests concluded. Of these, 42,048 were negative, 11,034 tests were positive. 114 patients were in intensive care last night, with 103 of those having tested positive. There were a total of 1,727 people in hospital with either confirmed or suspected COVID-19 cases, and both of those figures are a slight drop from yesterday. There is an increase of 313 confirmed cases, a reduction in the numbers in hospital. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the COVID-19 infection has sadly risen to 1,415. Now, that number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 21,092 patients who have tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from the illness, an increase of 360. Again, this only refers to those who have died in hospital following a positive test. Also today, the National Records of Scotland published its weekly analysis for the week to 26th of April. These show a total of 2,272 coronavirus-related deaths in Scotland, almost 800 more than the running daily total. Total excess mortality for the week stood at 743, with 85% of those linked to the coronavirus and 10% from deaths related to Alzheimer's disease and dementia. This compares well with the ONS figures announced yesterday for England and Wales. Almost 40% of all COVID-19 deaths occurred in care homes, which also appears to compare well with other countries, where half or more of all COVID-19 deaths have occurred in residential care settings. And our first story tonight is on some research in Glasgow. Now, researchers in Glasgow may be just weeks away from rolling out a new COVID-19 antibody test. NHS officials confirmed today that a prototype with a 20-minute turnaround is in development and may be available for wider use soon. The new test is based on innovations made in developing tests for the Zika virus and dengue fever. Blood samples from previously infected COVID-19 patients will be used to determine the accuracy and reliability of the prototype before scaling up to mass production. The project is being developed through a new company, Coronex Limited, that brings together the NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, Scottish Health Innovations Limited, UK-based biotechnology partners, and the Glasgow-based investment partner Axon Healthcare. The test, which requires just a small drop of blood acquired from a finger prick, should show if antibodies to the novel coronavirus appear in the blood. This would show who has been infected, which will enable those who may have had the infection without showing symptoms to safely return to work, since they could assume they have a degree of immunity already. If trials are successful, the test will be manufactured in the UK, ensuring a secure and cost-effective supply to the NHS. It addresses the urgent need for a tool which demonstrates with high sensitivity and accuracy and at speed whether a person has acquired immunity to the COVID-19 virus. The developers believe it could be ready for use within as little as 12 weeks. And Mirella, if I could come to you first. Now, I understand you are conducting some research as well. We spoke yesterday on the show about some new money that had been announced, and I believe some of that's coming to you. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, so the Scottish Government, through the Chief Scientist's Office, has funded yesterday £5 million worth of projects around Scotland. And just under 1 million is coming to University of Aberdeen. Ours is one of the projects, which is a collaboration really between academia and a spin-out company from the University of Aberdeen called the Vertebrate Antibodies Limited, and with the NHS Grampian as well. So what we are trying to do is similarly develop an antibody technology to really understand which patients have already developed immunity towards the COVID-19. So we're trying to take an approach of using artificial intelligence that vertebrate antibodies has developed to really allow us to look at COVID-19 or to look at SARS-CoV-2 virus, which causes COVID-19, to look at different signatures on the virus and really try and understand if a person has had an infection and whether they have developed antibodies to the infection. What we're trying to do also is not just develop a high throughput screen in effect, but also it should be quite fast. It should have more reliability, so we should get less false negatives. So it should be more specific, so it will be we'll get less false positives. But also we should be able to screen large numbers relatively fast. So what we're trying to do is miniaturize everything so that we can have like a 96 well plate or 384 samples that you could just run in one go. So like what you were talking about, the previous project, it's an antibody-based technology. Ours is similar antibody-based technology by using AI to really inform us on how to develop a really specific assay, and also the AI is going to allow us to kind of eliminate looking at other viruses that have maybe similarities in some of the regions, so like excluding MERS and SARS virus, so that we can really have it as specific as possible and screen a large number of essential care workers and the large population, really.
That's fascinating. So how quickly can this sort of research be done? I mean, it sounds like a huge task, but there's all these new projects being announced.
It's a huge task, but it was very specific. So the Scottish Government with the CSO call was very specific that they wanted to fund. It was a rapid response call, so all the projects should be deliverable within 6 months. So it was very specific that the work that would take place would be 3 to 6 months. So our project is aiming for 6 months to deliver on its aims. So it's not something that is meant to take years in effect. And the idea is that the technology that we would be developing can then later on be used perhaps towards development of vaccines, etc.
Mm-hmm. And are you working with any other partners on this, or is this just in Aberdeen this is happening?
So no, this is happening in Aberdeen, but as I say, we're working with a spin-out company, Vertebrate Antibodies Limited. They already make antibodies for a number of European consortia, etc. So they're incredibly well equipped to do this, and with NHS Grampian and working with the biorepository, etc. So while it is quite local, there is no reason that we shouldn't be working across Scotland with other partners as well.
Mm-hmm. And do you know much about any of these other projects that were announced yesterday?
So I have read, the projects that are being funded through the CSO, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so for example, as I say, there are 6 that are being funded in Aberdeen, and they're all very different. So the Scottish Government was very specific that they wanted kind of a wide variety of projects. So while we're looking at antibodies and development of diagnostic tools, there are other projects that are looking at kind of epidemiology of disease. There are projects that are also looking at other vulnerable groups. So for example, we know that hospital access is now limited in a lot of places to COVID-19 patients, but what happens to all the other vulnerable groups that require treatment? So, for example, cancer patients who can't get their treatment at the moment. So there are projects, for example, looking at that as well.
All right, that's fascinating. We have been just reminding our viewers, of course, the NHS is still open for business. If people do have concerns about their health, they should still be able to speak to their GP or get into accident and emergency if needed.
Absolutely, and some of my cardiologist colleagues have been saying that people, if they have signs of having a myocardial infarction, or if they're not feeling well, they should be able to access treatment. Treatment is available. It just seems that people are not coming through.
Yeah. It's people obviously are feeling like they don't want to burden the NHS, but clearly the reason that some other things in the NHS have been scaled back is so that capacity does remain. We do want to remind people that you shouldn't be dying of a heart attack or a stroke because of coronavirus. You should still be able to get that treatment you need. But we do move on now, and An SNP MP has ramped up calls on the UK government to strengthen support for those in financial difficulty and to prevent more people from falling through the gaps by urgently introducing a universal basic income. At PMQs today, Dave Duggan cited a constituent who had missed out on the furlough scheme due to Treasury rules. The MP pressed the First Secretary of State, Dominic Raab, to come good on the UK government's pledge to not leave people behind. Last week, over 100 MPs and peers from all political parties except the Tories across the UK came together and backed calls for a recovery universal basic income. Dave Duggan, the SNP MP for Angus, said, "The Chancellor said of the UK government's COVID-19 response that we will not leave you behind, we all stand together," while announcing a financial package that did leave behind many of my constituents and people across the UK through his government's refusal to introduce a universal basic income. Time and time again, we are hearing cases of people falling through the gaps in the measures brought forward by the UK government, including my constituent who could not be furloughed by his former employer, and because of Treasury rules, neither can he be furloughed by his new employer. A universal basic income will go a long way to help people who are struggling through no fault of their own, put cash in people's pockets, and ensure a strong economic recovery and a fairer society. And Andrew, we have talked on this show countless times over all the time that I've been here, the last couple of years, about universal basic income and its value. We also saw the First Minister today speaking a little bit about universal basic income and how important it was. Do you think this is something that will continue to be part of the Scottish Government's plans after the coronavirus crisis is over?
I think so, yes, Kenny. I think the challenges and the shock that the current crisis has brought means that it simply accelerates the progress. It increases our understanding and it accelerates our progress towards development and implementation of some form of UBI scheme. I should also say, I think that the question at PMQs today from Dave Duggan indicates again just how great an MP Dave is going to be. He was only elected in the December general election, and it's clear that he's hit the ground running, and it's clear he's doing a great job for the people of Arbroath. But on the more general point, I think we will see I think this may throw into some relief divisions within the cabinet and the Conservative Party as well. It'll be interesting to see which cabinet ministers and members of the Tory Party begin to recognise that in the extreme circumstances that we are about to encounter, economically, and potentially the even greater the implications on top of that of a hard or no deal Brexit in only a few months' time. I think we will find recognition that UBI is going to be a necessity. I think that will come during this year. I know that the Conservatives and a Conservative government like this will be very slow. They will drag their feet and they will resist, and they will eventually be dragged kicking and screaming to the table to have a sensible conversation, much in the same way as we've seen the reaction and the response from the Cabinet to the current crisis that we're in just now. But I think that it's apparent that some form of universal basic income, it's an idea whose time is just about upon us.
Yeah, we had Ronnie Cowan, the Inverclyde MP, on the show. He's a long-time campaigner for UBI, and he said that he knows he has spoken to Tory MPs who are right behind the idea, who accept the kind of right-wing argument for UBI, that it's less, it takes away a lot of government bureaucracy. What do you think it is that stops some of those Tory MPs from coming forward and signing the letter that so many other MPs did sign?
I think Dominic Cummings is probably in the mix there somewhere, and some fairly heavy-handed behaviour by the Whip's office. We need to bear in mind that this is a Conservative government very much taken prisoner by the extreme right wing of that party, and they will object as a matter of political dogma. They will object to anything which has the appearance of prioritising or giving some form of assistance to people who are poor. I think it's no more complicated than that. I was reminded this morning that an arch redesigner of the benefits system, Ian Duncan Smith, is on record at a previous Tory conference speaking in very blunt and strong terms about the menace that that unmarried fathers are to society. Given the news this morning, for once, I maybe find myself agreeing with Ian Duncan Smith.
Yeah, well, we're not talking about that story. We don't think that's particularly worth a lot of attention, but I do somewhat agree with you. Moving on, though, to something you mentioned there. The SNP has said that the Tory government is gambling with our economic future by refusing to agree to an extension to the Brexit transition period, despite the coronavirus crisis. Also at PMQs, Ian Blackford said that threatening to impose a no-deal Brexit in the middle of a global pandemic would damage UK jobs, businesses and the economy, and called for the UK government to embrace common sense and agree to a 2-year extension. The SNP Westminster leader pointed to figures from the World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund and the Office for Budget Responsibility, which suggested that the UK economy could shrink by 35% with 2 million people losing their jobs as a result of the coronavirus crisis. Commenting after PMQs, Ian Blackford said, "The Tory government is recklessly gambling with our economic future by threatening to impose a devastating no-deal Brexit in the middle of the biggest economic crisis of our time. Boris Johnson must show some leadership, face down the hardliners in the Tory party and agree to a 2-year extension to protect jobs, businesses and living standards." And Mirella, what's your feeling? I mean, obviously you're not a native-born Scot, and so presumably you have a slightly different view of how some of this anti-European sentiment works in Britain. What do you make of the Brexit process, and how has it affected you personally?
Well, as you know, Bosnia isn't in European Union yet,
no.
so obviously that doesn't affect me. But what does affect me as a scientist and as a person who has travelled the world and worked with loads of different people is kind of the attitude towards immigrants that we see. But I think it's quite frightening. We're constantly leaving everything to the last minute, and that's what really bothers me. Is every single time it's like the no extension. So are we going to work up until a week before Brexit deadline till we then ask for an extension? That's a really worrying thing. And from a scientific point of view, as scientists, we have raised this over and over again, that we have to have clarity. We have to have clarity whether we can apply for European Union funding, whether we can continue to be part of big consortia. I mean, COVID-19 should teach us something, and that is really that only by collaborative efforts and worldwide efforts can we achieve anything in science and in medicine. And it just appears that that's being pushed back and not thought about at all. From a personal perspective, I say I'm quite lucky to live in Scotland, which is such an open society. I think it's just completely different. I have not seen any kind of anti-European feelings, but it could be the people I associate with. I guess everybody I know is a scientist, so everybody is very pro-European. So I think we need clarity, and we need to know that exactly future jobs will be protected, that our children will be able to work in Europe and vice versa. People who are currently working for the NHS, the essential workers, people who are working in care homes are all from European countries. Mm-hmm. So we can't leave this till the last minute, but that's my personal opinion.
Yeah. When it comes to things like scientific funding, obviously you're looking years ahead often. Is it already becoming the case that certain types of funding just aren't available to you now?
Well, at the moment, things are available, and of course, everything will now depend on the outcome of negotiations. If there's a hard Brexit, we're not going to have any of that. But even after the referendum, which voted to leave, there were already feelings that UK scientists were not part of consortia like they used to be. I mean, that's anecdotal evidence, of course. Mm-hmm. We've started feeling more and more isolated when it comes to people putting teams together, because why would you have somebody from UK on the team when we don't know what may happen next year? So it is really worrying what will happen in the future, and we need clarity, and we need clarity in regards to our EU students and all sorts of things.
Yeah. And Andrew, I mean, again, this is something that we've talked about at length many times. Do you get any sense that the Tories are listening to this increasing kind of clamour from people to make some sort of delay? Because this has to be decided by the end of June if we're going to have any extension past the end of December.
Yes. No. As I said, my own belief at the moment is that the Tory party is very firmly in the grip of a hard right, dogmatic pro-Brexit cabal or extreme group who are determined, no matter the implications and no matter the damage it does, they will achieve their Brexit plan. And so, at the moment, I don't think there's any indication that that either in the party widely or in the let alone at the centre of the party, that there's anyone would dare stand up and suggest that the future that Brexit is supposed to present is going away.
Yeah, it surprises me that the coronavirus hasn't kind of put some sort of pressure in place, but it does seem that we've seen Michael Gove this week say that there would be no extension under any circumstances. So we will obviously keep watching, but some decision is going to have to be made very soon. But moving on to Catalonia, where senior Catalan politicians have said that the coronavirus crisis only highlights the need for the Catalan nation to claim its independence. Meritxell Budó, a spokeswoman for the Catalan government, said that there would not have been so many deaths if Catalonia were independent. Jon Canadell, chairman of the Barcelona Chamber of Commerce, tweeted, "Spain is unemployment and death, Catalonia life and future." The coronavirus pandemic, which has caused at least 24,275 deaths in Spain, including 4,905 in Catalonia, has pulled focus away from the autonomous nation's struggle for independence. As some lockdown restrictions have begun to be lifted this week, several Catalan representatives have sought to highlight the differences between their response and the response of the Madrid government. "The pandemic has once more showed the need to have a Catalan state," said Marta Vilalta, the Deputy Secretary General of Esquerra Republicana de Catalunya party. "Had it been able to act alone, Catalonia would have been much better placed to act swiftly," Vilalta argued, criticising Madrid's takeover of health services from the regions. The Catalan government sought a full lockdown of the region on March 13th and 2 days later said that only essential workers should be allowed to leave home. Spain's Socialist Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, issued a nationwide lockdown on March 14th, but did not ban non-essential work until March 30th. Spanish nationalist parties have reacted angrily, suggesting that the Catalan government was using the constitutional question to distract from its own failings. Meanwhile, Quim Torra, the head of the Catalan government and leader of the centre-right Junta per Catalunya party, has called off a planned snap election prompted by tensions with its coalition partner, the ERC. The ERC had sought further dialogue with Madrid following the socialist win in last year's election, while Torra's party favours a more confrontational approach. And Andrew, we were talking just before we came on air about our First Minister's kind of determination not to make the coronavirus a political issue. What do you think about this issue in Catalonia? What do you think of this idea that it does highlight differences between the Catalonian approach and the Spanish approach, and that's something that they can make political capital from?
Well, I think what we heard on Sunday from Pilar, I think, who was telling us also about the clampdown by Madrid on local media in Catalonia and Galicia. So I think we see central governments using the opportunity to assert power and control in a way that they wouldn't normally have done so. I think we've seen from our own experience here that the ability to identify an approach and demands and approaches to what is required in Scotland has thrown into sharper relief that we do better when we are in control of our own affairs, and we do better when we are able to deliver what is required by the people who are in Scotland. I think we're seeing the same arguments in Spain, unsurprisingly. I think from a Scottish sensibility, that the First Minister is in many ways walking the walk in terms of dealing with the current crisis, I think ultimately that will speak very strongly as a positive message for Scots and Scotland to have more control over its destiny and its future. But in the meantime, I think there's undoubtedly grave sensitivity around about appearing to be distracted from attempting to reduce the number of Scots who are dying at the moment, and that's a big political challenge.
Yeah. Mirella, obviously you're from Bosnia, a country that has had a much more troubled history in becoming independent. How do you view these other struggles around Europe, places like Catalonia and Scotland? What kind of how does that come across to someone who's come from somewhere that's had the history that Bosnia has?
I always had quite mixed feelings about this. I don't know what's been happening recently in Catalonia because I haven't been following it as closely, to be honest. Obviously, we went through a very violent war, but a lot of it was using religion as an excuse to try and exterminate the people. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's quite comparable to what's going around, democratic world in effect. So it's difficult for me to make a comparison because I think they're very different in effect. So
yeah. That's understandable. I mean, we were sometimes accused of trying to balkanize Britain, and I like to think that we're somewhat different from that.
I think hopefully we're far away from that. The only argument I have used about the whole Brexit scenario has been that people have forgotten the reason why European Union was formed in the first place, and that was a peace project.
Yeah.
And that's the main thing for me all the time, that we retain peace. I mean, it's a small thing to ask for, perhaps, but it's actually not a small thing. So, sorry, I can't comment more on that.
No, it's perfectly understandable. Moving on, though, to the other side of the world, where Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said today that the Tokyo Olympics could not take place next year unless the coronavirus pandemic is contained, as the city's governor called for an extension of the nationwide state of emergency. With the epidemic's worldwide infection rate climbing and experts suggesting a vaccine is still a long way off, doubts have been raised about the chances of holding the huge event next year. We've been saying the Olympic and Paralympic Games must be held in a complete form in that athletes and spectators can all participate safely. It would be impossible to hold the Games in such a complete form unless the coronavirus pandemic is contained, Abe said in response to an opposition question in the Japanese Diet, or Parliament. Abe's approach was later underlined by IOC President Thomas Bach, who said, "The IOC fully agrees with the position of Prime Minister Abe. From the very beginning of this crisis, we established the principle that the Olympic and Paralympic Games can only be organised in a safe environment for everyone involved. This principle has driven all our decisions so far, and we remain committed to it in the future." And Mirella, with all this research that's going on, there's talk of developing vaccines and whatnot. Do you think there's any chance that a vaccine can be developed in time for the Olympics to go ahead next summer?
Well, I am very hopeful that we will have a vaccine in the next 12 to 18 months. But then you have to think about the implementation. Even if it passes clinical trials and it's all looking good, you have to look at how we would vaccinate all these people across different countries, how we would make enough for whole of the world in effect. So I think planning events for next year, I wouldn't hold my breath there. I think people love to think about just going back to normal, but I think we have to be quite cognizant that things will not be back to old normal for a while, and that's not something to be depressed about. I think we will have a vaccine eventually, but until then we should really concentrate on just trying to stop the spread of the virus. So even with the scientific conferences we've been talking about this, all the scientific conferences this year have been cancelled, but some people are already talking, we'll just convene next year. But I think we can't really say that until we have a vaccine, until we have a way of actually manufacturing it, delivering it, I don't think we should be planning anything, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real tragedy for any athletes who have been, working their whole lives toward this. But as you say, we have to keep people safe first and foremost.
Yeah.
Kenny, I think it's also useful to bear in mind, I think Prime Minister Abe-san is probably also talking to a domestic audience there too. We're in the middle of what's called Golden Week in Japan, which is a 2-week public holiday, effectively, with a succession of events for commemorating previous imperial families and celebrating children and all sorts of things. And so, given the concerns in Japan with regard to the risk of infection rates climbing again, and Japan starting to lock down a little bit more tightly than it has been before, I wonder whether the Prime Minister is also signalling to his electorate and to the people that they are in for a long haul in this, and that whilst Japan had not locked down particularly hard beforehand, and also the death rates in Japan seem to be comparatively low, I wonder if he's also signalling to his electorate that this is not something that's going to be dealt with quickly.
Yeah, that's very possible. Back in Scotland, though, requests under Police Scotland's domestic abuse disclosure scheme have increased by 18% since lockdown began. Nearly 260 requests for disclosure were made between the start of lockdown on 23rd of March and the 27th of April, compared to 219 in the same period last year. The majority of requests are being made by police officers and other professionals, including social workers and NHS staff, who can raise a concern about anyone they think may be at risk of domestic abuse. Police Scotland will then make a decision about whether to disclose relevant information to help safeguard that person. Assistant Chief Constable Duncan Sloan said, "Domestic abuse is an ongoing threat in our local communities, and there remains an increased risk as people continue to observe isolation and physical distancing guidance. Police Scotland will not tolerate domestic abuse. Tackling it and preventing it is 0271234, and we'll just keep that number up while we talk about this story. This is one of the great tragedies, I think, of the coronavirus epidemic, Marilla, where people are in the house, under a lot of stress in a lot of cases, and it seems that there has been a spike in reports of domestic abuse. What do you make of this? And what do you think we can do to kind of help reduce it?
I mean, it's frightening. I've been following in the news as well, and it is really scary. And I know people have been advocating very strongly that we need to do more to protect the vulnerable. What we can do, obviously, the police will have their, right to try and interfere, but it's just so difficult for the victims to escape from the household. Where would they go, etc.? So I don't have a solution, unfortunately, but I'm glad that people are aware of it and talking about it. And I think it needs to be a priority, an absolute priority needs to be on top of the list.
Yeah. Andrew, again, this is, obviously a really difficult thing to talk about. Again, really the same question to you. Do you have any thoughts on how we can address this better?
Well, it crossed my mind that we might be seeing, in some senses, we're perhaps seeing the population responding in the same way as it is by not presenting at hospitals when people are unwell. And so in the same way as people are not seeking medical help for medical problems, they are not, for whatever reason, they are responding to the lockdown in a way that means that they're not able to, or they feel that they're not able to seek help in situations of domestic violence and harm. And I think what we need to do is to develop messages and promote understanding that in both cases, both of which are very, very serious, that in both cases the emergency services and the support services that exist in Scotland are still fully operational, and that people should not hesitate in situations relating to their health or to their safety to seek help and assistance. And I think we've seen messaging with regard to the NHS is open in Scotland, and I think and now we're starting to see the messages being shared about the means by which people can seek help. And in a more general sense, I think it'll be interesting to see how the crime statistics begin to unfold. Obviously, criminal behaviour at football matches has stopped. And obviously there's a great deal less traffic on the roads. But for the very, very serious circumstances of domestic abuse and violence in social settings, I think it's unfortunately it's not a surprise that we're seeing a bump at the moment. I think it'll be interesting and telling to watch those statistics unfold and to see what we can do to focus communications and focus understanding in support of people who ought to be taking the support that they need right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, that phone number for it is a 24-hour line. It's 0800 027 1234. And again, if you are in that situation, then please do be aware. As difficult as it is, the police are there to help. The helpline is there to offer any support that they can. The shelters and whatnot are all still open. So please, if you are in that situation, please do try and seek help. Moving on though, responding to the publication of GDP quarterly national accounts figures, which confirm a 0.2% increase in GDP in the last quarter of 2019, Economy Secretary Fiona Hislop has said, these figures obviously predate the current coronavirus pandemic, and we are very much aware that the latest State of the Economy report published by the Chief Economist last week presents analysis showing the very serious challenges posed to Scotland's economy by the lockdown measures currently in place. That is why we've set up an independent advisory group to provide expert economic advice, which will be crucial to help us deal with the challenge of rebuilding our economy. The Scottish Government is working extremely hard with all our partners to protect Scotland's economy as much as possible during these unprecedented challenges. We've offered a package of support worth £2.3 billion, which includes 1.6% rate relief for all non-domestic properties in 2020 to 21, and 100% relief for properties in retail, hospitality, leisure and airports. A £100 million package of support for small businesses and newly self-employed people will be open to applications by the end of this month. In addition, we've extended the £10,000 small business grant and the £25,000 retail, hospitality and leisure grant scheme in response to feedback from business. And Mirella, this is statistics from the end of last year showing a small improvement in GDP, but it all kind of looks pretty meaningless in the context of an economy that's virtually shut down now. What do you think needs to be done as we start to look at rebuilding the economy?
Well, I can just tell you, kind of speaking to friends who are self-employed, they would like some clarity, some thinking, kind of openness of what we're thinking, how we're going to start reopening the country for business in effect, especially those who have small businesses in construction, etc. They would really like some clarity of what the government is planning, when they're planning to reopen schools, for example. I know that it's something we can't think about yet, but we actually should be thinking about it. We can see what's happening in France, in Spain, we can see in Italy, Germany never completely shuts down. So I think we need to really communicate better with the people to say what the thinking is, what's the next step, how do we plan for slow reopening, what is not, kind of everything is about essential work, which is what it should be. But we also have to start thinking about businesses surviving and people feeding their children in effect. So we have to have some kind of continuity planning. But again, that's just me speaking to my friends and colleagues, etc.
Yeah.
As I say, every single sector of the economy is going to be affected, from education to everything, banking, everything else. But we need to start thinking how to rebuild. I mean, the good thing is that there's so much innovation in Scotland that we should be pretty strong as soon as we are kind of back to some sort of working possibly not working from home all the time. But as I say, everybody has done really well trying to work from home. But we need to start kind of, the first thing I think would be talking about when the schools would perhaps reopen or reopen in some kind of way so that parents can go back to work.
Yeah. And Andrew, we've seen quite a lot of talk, particularly around things like UBI, but also around just changing the measures of the economy. The Scottish Government is already part of the Wellbeing Government's alliance with New Zealand and Iceland. Do you think this pause in the economy, this great pause that we've talked about, do you think it presents any opportunities to really change the fundamental organisation of the economy, or do you think we're likely to see just a return to business as usual?
I get the feeling that at the moment that generally people are fully consumed by dealing with the current crisis, either in their working lives or in their private lives. Everything has changed. And so I think for many people, there hasn't yet been an opportunity to think about how we might reprioritize and reconfigure our economy. I'm reminded that I think this morning or yesterday, the International Labour Organization, which is part of the UN, indicated that they fear that up to 50% of the working population of the planet will be out of work or severely affected by this. That's more than 1.5 billion people. And I think that indicates that the scale of the challenges we are about to face are so significant that it's not so much about finding time just now to think about reconfiguring. The reconfiguring is going to be forced upon us by the extent of the changes and the extent of the problem that we are going to face for the rest of this year.
Yeah. Well, we do have some more statistics here. The chief statistician has released statistics showing that the amount of retail goods bought in Scotland fell by 1.1% during January to March of this year. Over the same period, Great Britain as a whole saw a contraction of 1.6%. The amount spent on retail sales, not adjusted for inflation, contracted by 1.1% during that first quarter. Compared to the same time last year, the amount of retail goods bought in Scotland contracted by 1.7%. And in Great Britain as a whole, that figure was 1.8%. The Scottish Government has been investigating ways to make faster use of available data to allow more up-to-date monitoring of the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on the economy and to help policymakers and economic forecasters. The two strands to this work are a monthly business index and monthly GDP estimates. As part of this work, it's been proposed that the retail sales index be amalgamated with the MBI and the MGDP and suspended as a separate release until further notice to free up resources to work on the estimates for the whole economy. Now, it's not really a surprise, Andrew, that we've seen a contraction in retail sales. We saw, the lockdown start right at the tail end of March, which has kind of reduced where probably most of that reduction has come from. Now, obviously, we're not going to be bragging like Priti Patel that shoplifting has fallen dramatically over the last few weeks. But again, this same question. How do you think the retail sector is going to rebound, given that people's financial resources are going to be so stretched just getting them through this period? Do you think we're likely to see a quick rebound once the shops open and people are rushing out to buy things?
Well, I think certainly we've seen, we saw through March, people, and I'm not surprised, but people recognising that it was likely that there would be those significant financial pressures, and so people stopped their discretionary spend, really, I think. And so on the one hand, the retail activity reduced. I think that possibly means that there is a little bit more money in people's pockets if they are still in employment and are still earning a wage. So for that section of the population, maybe a little bit of the financial pressure is a little bit less at the moment for them, but certainly there's no indication that people are starting their discretionary spending again. And I think for the rest, probably a significant part of the population who either already have seen their income reduced or stopped, I think there's little prospect of discretionary spending returning for some considerable time. I know that the Scottish actor Alan Cumming was speculating about how people's behaviour might be after we are through this and after social distancing measures end, if they end. But he wasn't talking about economic activity, other activity. But I think any bounce in the retail sector is some way away.
Mm-hmm. And Mirella, I've heard some analysts talking about how having been in the house without access to normal retail stores, people have got more used to the idea of kind of home deliveries and buying everything that they need online. Do you think that we might see some kind of shift in buying behaviour? Or do you think the fact that people just want to get out of the house will see a kind of return to the high street?
I very much doubt that people will go back to business as usual when this is over. I mean, I remember just before the lockdown, a couple of weeks before the lockdown, I popped into one of the major department stores to get something, and it was 3 stories, of the shop completely empty already. So people were too scared to go shopping because they didn't want to catch anything. I think people are really worried about their finances, like you said. I don't know anybody who hasn't been affected. I don't really think there's a lot more kind of left in the kitty just because we haven't been going out, because everybody's been very careful. I live in Aberdeen, the city that is hugely volatile, in regards to oil prices. And we've seen what's happened to the oil prices. A lot of people have lost their jobs before furlough scheme was announced. So I can't see it rebounding very quickly. And retail is doing badly, but obviously food shops are doing quite well. And it's interesting, the B&Q's apparently doing quite well with all these queues outside. So people will be thinking more about kind of their homes and how to have nice things for, their meals and their gardens rather than going out buying clothes, to be honest. So, I can't see it rebounding very fast. So we will have to change the way we shop. I think the shops were already aware that more and more people are interested in buying things online. When you think about Christmas shopping, less and less of us are ever going into the shops because you don't want to be, in effect, queuing up for tills when you can just have it delivered at home anyway. It's easier and more convenient. So I think that's the way that it was going to be going anyway. It's just been sped up, in effect.
Yeah. Well, we move on again, and to mark National Postal Workers Day today, SNP MP Marion Fellows has called for improved postal workers' pay and conditions and for Royal Mail to be brought back into public ownership. In a letter to the Royal Mail CEO Rico Back, Mrs Fellows called for greater provision of personal protective equipment and a proper reward and recognition for postal workers, as well as an end to advertising mail. Mrs Fellows has also written to Business Secretary Alok Sharma, urging him to support these calls and for the UK government to investigate bringing Royal Mail back into public ownership to ensure the interests of its workers and the public it serves are met. And Andrew, I mean, I've found myself this week writing to my niece and nephew. They've been writing to my mum a couple of times. I've been writing to a couple of other people as well. Do you see any chance of the Royal Mail kind of coming back into public ownership and people kind of getting back into writing letters, or do you think this is something that again we're just seeing the end of an industry?
That's an interesting question, Kenny. The growth in home shopping and online shopping certainly has obviously has supported a number of businesses, private sector businesses, who compete with the postal service. I think we know that a number of those, I'm thinking of one in particular that's owned by the Barclay brothers, are in significant financial difficulties. And I don't know whether the current increase in online shopping is going to extend the lifespan of one or two of those competitors or not. I think in terms, again, of what we were talking about before, in terms of a resetting or a reconfiguring of the way in which we approach the economy, I think there's a good chance that we may begin to appreciate once more elements of our economy and of our society, which previously would be regarded as critical national infrastructure, and the Royal Mail was one of them. We may begin to reflect and reconfigure our approach to them, and perhaps consider that they might be taken back into public ownership because they are part of the critical national infrastructure. The concerns with regard to Aberdeen, I think, in a way, are similar. I know that some offshore workers know that they are required to continue working because they are considered to be part of critical national infrastructure, and I think the same is true of posties. I think there's lots of evidence, both in urban Scotland and in rural Scotland, that postal workers, especially those working in deliveries, are an important part of daily life insofar as they know many of their customers, they know they are a lifeline in certain circumstances, and they are an important check and balance and provider of news and information and support, both for people living in rural settings, but also I think people living in tenements in our city centres, especially older people. Mm-hmm. So I think there's perhaps an opportunity. There is an opportunity here for us to reconsider the importance of things which, for reasons of political dogma, had been sold, and we might consider the broader relevance and the broader importance of those industries and those workers as we make our way through this crisis and come out the far end.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know there was a Postal Workers' Day until today, so we do salute our posties. It is incredible that they do keep working through this crisis. They've doing, and I know my own postie quite well, and he's doing a fabulous job. So thank you. Now, the SNP's Alison Thulis has urged the UK government to stand behind businesses in their time of need as gaps emerge over claims and cover due to the coronavirus pandemic. Thulis, the SNP's Shadow Chancellor, earlier echoed concerns raised by policyholders, many of them small and medium-sized businesses, who have expressed frustration at claims being rejected. A number of them because COVID-19 isn't specified in their policy, despite having infectious disease cover in their business interruption insurance. Commenting after PMQs, Thulis said, "Many businesses in my constituency and around the UK have shut their doors because of public health advice. However, a number of businesses are now finding their insurers are refusing to pay out on business interruption policies. A number of small and medium-sized businesses have taken out an insurance policy to protect against unforeseen events, such as the outbreak of a virus. And it now seems incredible that some insurance companies can suddenly abandon their responsibilities. While I don't ask insurers to retrospectively change policies, I urge the UK government to intervene and to stand behind those affected claims so that businesses do not lose out for doing the right thing." And Mirella, I mean, this insurance companies often seem to make it their business not to pay out, even when it seems that they should. What do you think about this kind of thing where people just don't seem to be some businesses don't seem to be willing to do the right thing, even as others are suffering because they're doing the right thing?
I mean, it's despicable. I have not actually heard of this. I think that's absolutely terrible, but presumably this is why we have the legal state. I mean, surely they're legally obliged to pay up, are they not? And so I would think that the government would want to step in pretty quickly there to make sure that they follow their obligations. I didn't actually see that story. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Yeah, it does seem pretty awful, doesn't it, Andrew, that businesses are having to close down, and then insurers are finding some loophole in the policy to say that they don't have to pay out.
I think there's a couple of things here, Kenny. Firstly, I remember that you and I spoke several weeks ago about the lack of consistent and clear advice from the Association of British Insurers relating to policies of domestic policies of buildings cover and contents cover. At that time, the ABI said that it was up to individual insurers, and that the ABI hoped that individual insurers would be pragmatic in their response to policyholders who were encountering difficulties complying with the obligations upon them with regard to their domestic insurance. Mm-hmm. I probably have to declare an interest. In a previous life, I spent a lot of time acting for and against insurers in the courts in Scotland, so that insurers seek to stick to the letter of how they see the letter of their insurance policies is a basic fundament of the insurance industry. Mm-hmm. to be entirely honest. However, again, in the current circumstance, it also crosses my mind that in circumstances where insurers come under pressure to pay out on these classes of business interruption insurance for the greater good, or because it's perceived to be the right thing to do, I suspect fairly quickly we will see the insurers coming cap in hand to the taxpayer, looking for the taxpayer to bail them out.
Yeah. Well, we move on now. We do only have a few minutes left. Scottish Green MSP John Finney has said that pharmacy provision of opiate substitute treatments and needle exchange programmes have a vital role in protecting patients and communities, and must be protected throughout the coronavirus crisis. Mr Finney, the co-convener of the Scottish Parliament's cross-party group on drug and alcohol misuse, has written to Public Health Minister Joe Fitzpatrick, backing calls from the Royal Pharmaceutical Society to ensure naloxone is available for all people who use drugs. The RPS has called for contingency plans to be put in place to ensure substance misuse services can continue uninterrupted, warning that failures to do so risk an increase in drug-related deaths. The Society also warned that a lack of support for people with drug addictions could result in them disregarding stay-at-home rules in order to source drugs, making community transmission of COVID-19 much more likely. And Mirella, this is one of those other really difficult subjects where people are addicted. They need those drugs, or they need their other things like methadone programs. And if there's a difficulty getting that support, then there's going to be more deaths, more trouble. What do you make of this call from John Finney?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, that's just another vulnerable group as well that we have to take care of as well. I watched it on BBC Scotland last night. I think the nurses, etc., the volunteers delivering methadone to people in Edinburgh. So it makes sense. Obviously, they are vulnerable people, and if you don't provide methadone and other alternatives, they will go out. I don't have much more to say, so I can see that we should take care of all of our vulnerable groups. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, it's fine that you don't have much to say because we only have time for this last story quite quickly anyway. Excuse me. Economic recovery should be shaped with the help of the Citizens' Climate Assembly rather than be guided by requests from wealthy elites, the Scottish Greens have said. Green MSPs secured a requirement to hold such an assembly as part of the climate bill last year. The old economy, we now face having to build an entirely new one. It is essential that the recovery plan doesn't double down on the mistakes which have forced so many into poverty and fueled the continuing climate crisis. That's why the recovery must be guided by the people through a climate citizens' assembly and advised by experts across every relevant field. The need for this assembly's voice is greater now than ever to provide a vital counterweight to the economic elites demanding huge bailouts from their private islands. I'm sure Ross Greer isn't making a personal attack on anybody with that last line, Andrew, but what do you make of this idea that people should be involved in developing a new economic model for the future?
I think there's a great deal to be said in support of Ross Greer's arguments and perspective, and I think it's tolerably clear that already in Scottish politics a degree of consensus is building in that direction. I think the principles document, which the Scottish Government published last week, talks about the opportunity to reshape the economy, taking in mind the basic fundaments that underpin government policy at the moment, which is about building a Scotland which is fairer for everybody and is greener as well. And so I think in making those statements, Ross Greer is probably pushing at an open door. And I think I would certainly hope and expect that we will see the Scottish Government responding positively and constructively and heading in that direction.
Yeah, and Mirella, what do you think about this? Can you see a way that we can develop a new climate frameworks coming out of this crisis?
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with what was just said. I mean, my son accuses my generation and previous generations of getting the Earth into the state that it's in at the moment. So I think the young children see this also as an opportunity to feed in. And I think COVID-19 indeed has taught us something. When you look at the pollution levels, etc., they've dropped down completely, and I think there is more of a need for people to feed in for the future of our kids. So yes.
Yeah. Well, that is all we've got time for tonight. So I'd like to thank Andrew and Mirella very much for joining us tonight. And we'd like to thank you at home as well. As always, there's no point in producing these shows if we don't have an audience. So thank you very much for being here. If you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland, that would be most welcome. If you can, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register to sign up as a supporter. Your £5 a month can help make a huge difference to what we're able to do here at Broadcasting Scotland. First of all, from just keeping the lights on, but also to then developing more better programmes and becoming the kind of independent broadcaster that Scotland deserves. We do understand, of course, that a lot of people are feeling very pinched just now. We've been talking a lot today about people's reduced incomes. So if you're not able to support us, please don't feel bad. The shows will always be free to view online, but you can still help us by letting people know about us. Please do follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, and follow us on Facebook as well. Just search for Broadcasting Scotland. Share the programmes around, let people know why you watch Broadcasting Scotland, and hopefully you can be our marketing team for us. And also, if you would like to get involved, there are always jobs to be done here, both in front of and behind the camera. So if you've got any interest in how a television station works and you want to get involved in whatever way, whether as a journalist, a camera operator, or as a host of the show, then you are more than welcome. Please do get in touch and let us know what you want to do. We've always got space for more people to get involved. So I would like to thank once again Andrew Wilson from All Under One Banner and Mirella Delabegovic. Mirella, I especially hope that you will come back and talk to us a bit more once your research is a wee bit further down the line.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure.
Excellent. Thank you. And Andrew, I'm quite certain we'll talk to you again very soon.
I hope so, Kenny. Thanks very much.
And so that is all we've got time for. Thank you for joining us once again. Gordon will be back again tomorrow at 7. I'll be back on Sunday with the full Scottish. But until then, have a great evening.